By 72, most people assume the story is already written. The kids are grown, the house is quieter, the routines are fixed. You've lived through marriages, losses, holidays, hospital visits, and quiet Sundays. You've collected decades like layers, each one heavier, softer, more complicated than the last. So when Margaret opened her eyes one morning, alone in a sunlit kitchen, surrounded by silence, it hit her. Not grief, not panic, but this quiet, stubborn thought. Is this it? No one talks about this fear, the fear that you're now just coasting toward the end, that the world has stopped expecting anything from you, so maybe you've stopped expecting it from yourself too. At 72, society says you're supposed to slow down. Watch from the sidelines. Be proud of your past, not curious about your future. But Margaret didn't feel done. She felt invisible. She made the tea, fed the cat, checked the weather, but the thought kept whispering, what if I'm not finished? Starting over at 72 sounds absurd to most. Too late, too fragile, too impractical. But the truth? The fear of not starting, of staying frozen in the same safe, small rhythm, was worse. Margaret didn't know what would come next. She just knew she couldn't keep sitting in a life that no longer felt like hers. And that was the beginning. Not of a crisis, not of a breakdown, but of a quiet, radical restart. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is wake up in your 70s and say, I'm not done. The moment everything changed. It happened on a Tuesday. Margaret was at the pharmacy, standing in the vitamin aisle, scanning labels with her reading glasses halfway down her nose. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The air smelled faintly of rubbing alcohol and hand lotion. Beside her, a young couple laughed, probably in their 30s. The woman said, "We've still got time to figure it all out." And the man replied, "Yeah, we're still young." Margaret felt it like a pinprick in her chest. Still young. She blinked. Still young. As if youth was the only currency for dreaming, for changing, for possibility. As if she were out of time. She left her basket and walked out. No dramatic music, no lightning strike. Just a shift. Subtle but sharp, like something cracked open inside her. Back home, she sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The mail was unopened. The cat had curled up by the window, and the clock on the wall ticked, mockingly, it felt. She remembered the art class she always said she'd try, the town she once wanted to visit, the story she never wrote. Not dreams, just pieces of herself she'd shelved. And that Tuesday afternoon, Margaret picked up the phone, not to call anyone, but to Google something she hadn't searched in over 30 years. Beginner watercolor classes near me. It was small, it was silly, but it was hers. Because sometimes change doesn't come with fireworks. Sometimes it walks in quietly, disguised as a feeling you can't shake. A knowing, a spark. And for Margaret, that moment in aisle 5 was when her new life began. Not with a plan, but with a decision, resistance, from others, and herself. When Margaret told her daughter she had signed up for a watercolor class, the response came with a pause. "Oh, that's cute," her daughter said, half smiling through the phone. "Just don't overdo it, Mom. You're not 20 anymore." It wasn't cruel. It was casual, thoughtless, but it stung. And it wasn't just her daughter. Her neighbor said, "You're taking what, at your age?" The receptionist at the art center asked if she meant to register her grandchild. Even her own inner voice whispered doubts in the dark. "You'll look ridiculous. You'll be the oldest one in the room. What's the point now?" Margaret hadn't expected applause, but she hadn't expected to feel so alone in trying. No one said it outright, but she felt it in every raised brow, every patronizing smile. "You've missed your window. Sit down. Be grateful. Don't rock the boat." But she'd spent years sitting down. Years being grateful to the point of disappearing. Years giving to others and losing track of the woman she once was. And that woman? She was starting to speak again, shaky, unsure but determined. So Margaret went to the first class. She wore her favorite scarf, Saturday in the back. Her hands trembled a little. Her heart beat too fast. But she was there, resisting the voice that said she couldn't, defying the narrative that said she shouldn't, and refusing, for once, to make herself small just to make others comfortable. Because starting over isn't just about learning something new. It's about unlearning everything that told you it was too late. The first brave step. The room smelled faintly of paper and paint water. Margaret sat at the edge of a long table, surrounded by strangers, some in their 22nd with tattoos and messy buns, others in their 52nd, laughing softly about how they hadn't drawn since high school. No one else had silver hair like hers. No one else seemed to be shaking as they held their brush. The instructor handed out small watercolor palettes and thick, textured paper. "Today," she said, "we're not aiming for masterpieces. Just movement, just expression." Margaret stared at the blank sheet in front of her. Blank. Like this chapter of her life. Unplanned. Unwritten. Wide open. Her hand hovered over the blue paint, then dipped, then swept, a clumsy line, then another. The color bled at the edges, unpredictable and soft. She made a mess. She smiled. It wasn't good, but it was hers. And it had been a long time since she created something that didn't have to be useful, practical, or impressive, just honest. After class, one of the younger women approached her. "I love how free your painting looked," she said. "I kept trying to be perfect." Margaret laughed, genuinely. "I spent most of my life trying to be perfect," she said. "Turns out, freedom feels better." That night, she slept deeper than she had in months. Because the first brave step isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just showing up, even when your hands shake. Sometimes it's sitting in a room where you don't quite belong, and painting anyway. And sometimes, it's daring to make a mess when the world expected you to stay tidy. The unexpected joy of being a beginner again. Margaret thought starting over would feel humiliating. Instead, it felt light. There was something oddly beautiful about being a beginner at 72. No one expected her to be great. No one demanded results. For the first time in decades, she was allowed to be new, without shame. She spilled water. She confused brushes. She painted a pear that looked more like a misshapen avocado. And she laughed, really laughed. A deep, belly kind of laugh she hadn't heard come from herself in years. She'd spent so much of her life being competent, reliable, the woman who had it together. But in that art room, with smudged fingertips and wrinkled paper, she got to be curious again. There was no pressure, just presence. She began looking forward to Mondays again, not because of what she might accomplish, but because of how she felt when she was learning. Awake, engaged, alive. And something else began to happen. People started noticing. The woman at the bakery asked if Margaret had changed her hair. Her daughter commented that she sounded different on the phone, lighter, brighter. Even her knees felt better. Maybe it was the walking, or maybe it was the joy. Being a beginner didn't make her feel small. It made her feel open again. Because, it turns out, starting over at 72 doesn't make you less of who you are. Sometimes, it brings back the parts you forgot existed. The turning point. It started with a sunflower. Margaret had painted it on a whim, yellow streaks too bright, the stem a little wobbly. She almost threw it out, but something in it made her smile, so she snapped a photo and posted it to a small Facebook group called Silver Creatives. She didn't expect anything from it, but within hours, comments poured in. "This made my day. I can feel the joy in this. Please, post more of your work." One message stood out. "Your painting reminded me it's not too late to start. I'm 68 and terrified. But you gave me hope." Margaret stared at the screen. Her messy little sunflower had moved someone. She felt her throat tighten. For decades, she had supported others, raised children, listened more than she spoke. She had been a good wife, a good neighbor, a good mother. But this was hers, and it mattered. She started sharing more. A clumsy still life, a field of lavender, her shaky first self-portrait. And slowly, something shifted. She wasn't just learning to paint, she was remembering how to be seen. Her daughter called, softer this time. "Mom, your art is beautiful. I think you've inspired me to sign up for a class too." It hit Margaret in that moment. She didn't just start over. She created ripples. And the surprise wasn't that she still had something left to give, it was that she'd barely begun to express who she really was. This was more than a turning point. It was a return. To herself. To joy. To life. What she lost. And what she gained. Starting over at 72 wasn't free. Margaret lost things. Some expected, some surprising. She lost her predictability. Her spotless house was now dotted with watercolor splatters and half-finished canvases. She lost her role as the ever-available, always reliable mom, gran, neighbor. She had to say no to things she once said yes to. Bake sales, errands, caretaking that came at the cost of her own energy. She lost comfort, familiar routines, the ease of invisibility. And at times, she grieved those losses. Because change, even joyful change, asks something of you. But what she gained? Freedom. Freedom from perfectionism, from timelines, from the weight of being everyone else's foundation. She gained energy, not the kind that runs marathons, but the kind that makes you wake up excited again. She gained friends, real ones. People who didn't know her as a mother, wife, or helper. Just as Margaret, the painter with a wild laugh and paint on her sleeves. She gained a sense of identity she hadn't felt since her 20s, not defined by what she did for others, but by what she loved. And perhaps, most precious of all, she gained time with herself, not in loneliness, but in companionship with the version of her that had been buried under years of duty. Starting over cost her something, but it gave her everything she didn't know she was missing. Because sometimes, it's not about reinventing who you are. It's about reclaiming the parts you thought were gone forever. What science says about late-life renewal. Margaret's story might sound rare, but science says it shouldn't be. We've been told for decades that our brains, bodies, and opportunities shrink with age. That change is for the young. That reinvention belongs to the first half of life. But the truth? That's a myth. And a dangerous one. Modern neuroscience has confirmed that the brain remains plastic, capable of learning, rewiring, and growing, well into our 72nd, 82nd, and even 92nd. Harvard studies show that older adults who pursue new learning, creative expression, and meaningful goals experience slower cognitive decline, lower rates of depression, and even longer lifespans. One study from the University of Michigan found that seniors with a strong sense of purpose were 2.4 times more likely to avoid disability and remain independent, not because of their diet, not because of their genes, but because they had something to wake up for. Margaret didn't just paint flowers. She rewired her brain. She stimulated her memory, strengthened her coordination, and boosted her mood, all with a single brave step toward doing something new. Doctors often call it successful aging. But to Margaret, it just felt like living again. And the ripple effect is real. When older adults take ownership of their story, their families benefit. Communities grow. Stereotypes break. It turns out, starting over at 72 isn't a miracle. It's biology plus courage. And the science is clear. You're never too old to begin again. The only thing that makes it rare is that too many people stop believing it's possible. Her message to anyone over 60. If Margaret could speak directly to every person over 60, she'd keep it simple. Don't wait. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for perfect health, perfect timing, or perfect support. Don't wait until someone else believes in you first. Because the longer you wait, the louder the doubts become, and the quieter your voice gets. She'd tell you that starting over at 72 wasn't easy, but what was harder was wondering what might have happened if she never tried. She'd remind you that your age doesn't disqualify you. In fact, it's your superpower. You've survived storms. You've built homes, families, stories, and strength. And now, you get to choose who you want to become next. Whether it's art, or travel, or dancing, or writing your memoir, the thing you've quietly dreamed about still matters. And it's not too late. You're not too old. You're not behind. You're just beginning a new chapter with more wisdom, clarity, and courage than you had at 30. Margaret's advice? Take the class. Book the trip. Speak up. Try the thing that scares you, because it might also set you free. And if no one claps for you at first, clap for yourself. Because you don't need the world's permission to begin again. You just need your own. It's never too late to begin. Margaret didn't start over to impress anyone. She started over because something deep inside whispered, "There's still more life in you." And now, she's 75. Still painting, still laughing, still waking up with something to look forward to. The world expects people to fade with age, to grow smaller, quieter, more predictable. But Margaret's story is proof. You can grow bolder, brighter, freer. Your age isn't an ending. It's an invitation to create something, to feel something, to become something again. So whether you're 62 or 82, don't assume your story's final chapter has been written. It hasn't. And maybe, just maybe, the best pages are still blank, waiting for you to pick up the pen.